Am I on? That'll do it. All right. We're glad you're here. A couple of updates from our, let's see, Brent, you might back that off a little. I'm liable to get wound up tonight, so there we go. I won't get wound up. Ladies, don't forget, Ladies Love Circle for April will be tomorrow, 10 o'clock at Roy and Janie Sanderson's cabin. And you can see Janie for directions, or Dina Salty will be here at 9:30 if anyone wants to carpool. So keep that in mind. That'll be tomorrow at 10 o'clock. The Bible marking class for April will be this Saturday at 10 o'clock. The topic is baptism. Please review the lesson that you did previously on the plan of salvation. If you don't have that lesson, you can check with Hannah Nixon or Samantha Hudson. All ladies and teen girls are invited for this Saturday at 10 o'clock. Our high school seniors are reminded of their group picture this coming Sunday, April the 12th, during Bible class. You'll be mindful of other details regarding Senior Sunday, which is fast approaching. But that's the last Sunday in April, so keep that in mind. Our Walk for Water campaign concludes this Sunday. If you plan on walking, tonight is the deadline to register so that we can be sure to have enough food for lunch. We plan to eat right after Bible class and then start here. Daniel's got it marked off, the 4 miles from here, from the church parking lot, looping back through town and then back to the building, I hope. So keep that in mind. That'll be coming up this coming Sunday. And you've just done great. We've raised over $10,000, which in addition to the money that will go to the drilling of a new well, the balance of that, of course, will be used for maintenance and that kind of thing. So you're to be thanked for your generosity, and it's been a great effort, and looking forward to that this coming Sunday. Now, as far as our prayer list is concerned, a couple of updates. Judy Sanders had knee replacement surgery on Monday and is doing well. Came home, and of course will have therapy. So remember her. I was checking with them, and their granddaughter Anna is doing very well. In fact, hopes to be walking by June, and had extensive surgery, had hip replacement. They had removed a tumor off of her bladder, and from a cancer standpoint, she's in really, really good shape. But continuing her physical therapy, and hopes to be up and about by June. So we'll keep you informed on her progress as well. But Em wanted me to convey to all of you their thanks for the prayers and the cards and everything that's been done to let this family know how much they're loved. So you're to be thanked for that. We want to remember the Wharton family. Bill Wharton, longtime coach and school administrator, passed away Sunday night, and his family, of course, here in our community. So our thoughts and prayers certainly go out to them. Anybody else? Let's bow. Father, we thank you for the beautiful day, for the constant reminders of your power and your concern and care for us, not just on a physical standpoint, but spiritually as well. We're mindful of our nation and the conflicts that have occurred the other side of the world, but also within our own borders. And we pray, Father, that those might be resolved to a thorough and a complete conclusion that would ensure the safety of all concerned. We're mindful of your church that meets throughout the world, especially in difficult places, and we ask your blessings on them. We're very mindful, Father, of those that have recently had health issues. We're thankful that Judy Sanders continues to recuperate, and pray, Father, for her full recovery. We have been mindful of Anna and the extensive surgery that she's undergone, in addition to the treatments that she's had to put this cancer in remission. And we pray, Father, that would continue, and that she would continue to be strengthened as she continues in her physical therapy. We're mindful of those families that have lost loved ones, and especially, Father, the family of Bill Horton, and that they would know of the many prayers that are being lifted up in our community. There are efforts, Father, that are ongoing, that our church is involved in from an outreach standpoint, and we just pray, Father, that as you bless those efforts, we're reminded that the only reason that we do that is to advance the borders of the kingdom, and the only glory, the only praise is to be given to you. Continue to go with us as we study tonight, and grant us, Father, those opportunities to incorporate the truths that we find within the pages of your word. All these things we ask in your Son's name. Amen. There it is. Not sure why I did that, but we want to get back into our series on the parables, and we're still in Matthew chapter 25. And last week we were there with that very, very familiar parable of the 10 virgins, and noted the 5 that were wise and the 5 not so wise. In fact, we even noted how direct the language was, and I noted that our English is a little bit more benevolent, a little more tactful, because one of the commentaries that I consulted said you could very easily have translated that section when it mentions verse 2, 5 of them were foolish. Verse 2, 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. And, the language would allow a translation that basically said 5 had a brain and 5 were morons, which kind of speaks to our culture today. But anyway, we talked at length about that, and what's compelling about that is how many times leading up to this, Jesus has said, no one knows the hour or the day or the time when he would return. And when we looked at that parable, we noted the reiteration was to be ready, to be watchful. That was the whole point of the parable of the 10. Whereas the one we're going to look at tonight, it's really a parable directing us to be mindful of wasted opportunities. There's an opportunity there, and 2 of the 3, this is that very familiar story of the parable of the talents, and we're going to be devoting our time to that tonight, and probably next week too, because there's just that much in this parable, and so we'll be directing our thoughts there. And so if you want to be turning, we're going to pick up in verse 14. And then it actually goes through verse 30, and we'll, as I said, we'll try to get that at least under consideration tonight. But when you go back and look, he's already said 5 times leading up to this. Chapter 24, verse 36, verse 42, verse 44, and verse 50. And then in chapter 25 and verse 13, 5 times he said, no one knows the day nor the hour. In other words, My return, as to its exact date and hour, nobody knows. Except who? Yeah, except the Father. Only the Father knows. And so, given that, it really is rather puzzling, and I went back from a historical standpoint and cataloged how many times others have decided or tried to pinpoint when the second coming is going to occur. The earliest one, the predicted date was 500 AD. This was Hippolytus of Rome and Irenaeus, and we have their writings in the pre-Nicene Fathers set of books that we have there in the library. You can read the writings of these theologians, Hippolytus of Rome, and Irenaeus and Sextus Julius, and well-informed individuals. They all three predicted Jesus would return in the year 500, and one of those predictions was based on the dimension of Noah's Ark. Hippolytus's commentary on Daniel, he writes that 6,000 years must pass since the creation of the world, and he believed that it was 5,500 years before Christ when that occurred with the ark, and then of course 500 years later that would be 6,000. So that was the earliest one, 500 AD. And then you can just work your way each century, 1260, 1368, 1492 was not just when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. It was also when various Russian theologians, Russian Orthodox Christians, predicted the return of Jesus. In 1408, the Russian Orthodox Church had determined that he was going to come in 1492, and so they stopped computing the date of Easter beyond 1491. Well, guess what? Wrong. They missed it, right? So you could here again, every century you can work your way through this, and you've got some prognosticators. Here's one I didn't know. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, foresaw the millennium beginning in the year 1836, and he wrote that Revelation 12 and verse 14 referenced the years 1058 to 1836 when he believed Jesus would return. Well, guess what didn't happen in 1836? Yeah, he didn't come. 1874, the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses, Charles T. Russell, predicted that 1874 was to be the year of Christ's return, and obviously it didn't happen. One of the most outlandish ones was predicted in 1891, or that he would return in 1891. The prediction actually came about in 1835, on the 14th of February. Here, Joseph Smith, on the eve of the first ordination of the 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, were chosen and ordained. It was at that point that President Smith stated that God had appeared to him and had informed him that Jesus would return in 1891. However, guess what did not happen in 1891? Yeah, Jesus did not return. In 1914, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and this is an important, the second coming is one of the key doctrines of the Jehovah's Witnesses, although they don't use that term. They do not use the term second coming. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus' return would be visible, and his return, of course, would usher in the Battle of Armageddon, as discussed in the book of Revelation. They believe that 1914 marked the beginning of his return. And of course, again, that didn't happen. 1917 to 1930, which I'm thinking, that's great, kind of a wide gap of time, but Sun Myung Moon, the Korean, evangelist, believed that sometime between 1917 and 1930, Jesus would return. Again, no, it didn't happen. Then, and this is getting to more some familiar names that a lot of people in here would remember, Herbert W. Armstrong. I can remember listening to him on Sunday nights. We would be coming back from one of Daddy's preaching appointments, and he wanted to find Herbert W. Armstrong, not because he was so interesting to listen to, but it was the only thing you could pick up that late at night. But he predicted in 1934 in his Plain Truth magazine that Christ would return in 1936. After that prediction failed, he stated in 1940 that Christ would come after 3.5 years of tribulation in October of 1943. After those failed, and a lot of his members bailed on him, he moved his operation from Oregon to Pasadena, California. Only then did he advance 2 more dates, 1972 and 1975. Again, didn't happen. And so here again, you've got that one. That was a pretty familiar one. Let's see. Let me move on. The one that I remember as a high school senior was Hal Lindsey. Hal Lindsey had published a book, The Late Great Planet Earth, and I can remember going to see the documentary there at the movie theater there in Montgomery. And this is all the Cold War, all the nuclear buildup between the United States and Russia, and he had found documentation of that in the Bible. And I can remember leaving there awfully confused, also irritated that I'd paid $5 for that. Any number of other avenues that came out, because he stated that Christ would return in the 1980s. Probably no later than 1988. Well, guess what? No, he did not. And Hal Lindsey, was basically defrocked as any kind of a credible leader, not necessarily because his theology was warped, which it was. He had some moral issues that later came about. So Hal Lindsey is taken out of the picture, and then one of his supporters, Edgar J. Whisenant, published in 1989 the Final Shout Rapture Report 1989, stating that he would come at the end of 1989. Well, he didn't. When his book 1989, his prediction failed in 1989. He predicted it in 1993 with another book, 23 Reasons Why Pre-Tribulation Rapture looks like it will occur on Rosh Hashanah 1993. Long title. But again, what? Didn't happen. And so here again, we get into this, this whole concept. Jerry Falwell, if you remember, made a prediction that Jesus would return in 1994, which didn't happen. As far as a futuristic standpoint, you remember Jean Dixon? Remember the psychic every January, her predictions for the upcoming year? Jean Dixon had prophesied or had predicted that Armageddon would take place in 2020 and that Jesus would return to defeat the unholy trinity of the Antichrist between 2020 and 2037. So she's still got a chance, even though she's dead. Sorry. There's still that chance. Future ones, let's say they've got them out to 2028, 2029, by 2057. And oddly enough, Sir Isaac Newton predicted the return of Jesus in 2060. Now, Newton, of course, was had an interest in biblical prophecy. He, of course, was well schooled in science and other things, but he believed that everything would come to an end 1,260 years after the Holy Roman Empire, which would be 2060. Said all that to say this. What's consistent about all of those, almost? They were wrong. They were wrong. And here again, you have to think, okay, how many times does Jesus have to say it? He says it 5 times here in chapter 24 and chapter 25. He basically says, you've asked me, I don't know. The angels don't know. Only the Father knows. So why would all these people take it upon themselves to try to calculate and pinpoint something that Jesus himself says, I don't even know. I don't even know. Other than it's some type of arrogance, or I don't know. They've got too much time on their hands to try to pinpoint what the Bible has already said we don't know. We don't know. And as I said, if you've got a red letter edition, as I do, everything in these 2 chapters are red because this is the final teaching session that Jesus does before his arrest and his trial and, of course, his crucifixion. And as I said, when you look at these 2 parables, and that's why I've got them back to back, the parable of the 10 in the first 12 verses, and then the parable of the talents from verses 14 to verse 30, both of them basically had the same point, the same intention. They make the same message, and that is what? You got to be ready. That's it. I mean, if that's an oversimplification, well, that's okay. Be ready. They are very, very important stories because at the end of each one, he says, watch therefore. And that kind of ties the 2 together. It ties it back to at least the parable of the 10. For you know not neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man comes. Then verse 14, for it's like a man traveling, and it takes us right into the next parable, which is also summed up in verse 13. 13 is kind of a bridge, if you will, between the 2. Verse 13, watch, therefore, for you don't know neither the day nor the hour. And that transitions us from that first parable to this second one. And they differ, but at the same time, in a sense, they're both parables about readiness. You remember we said last week, the 5 wise and the 5 foolish. 5 were ready when the bridegroom came because they had oil for their torches. And the 5 that didn't, represented, and here again, we didn't go into great detail, but it's rather interesting that the fact that these, follow the analogy, if all 10 of these are part of the wedding group, they're part of the wedding party, then these 5 unwise, or 5 that were morons, to use the modern translation, they're not talking about the world. We're talking about people that are professing faith. They're part of the wedding party. Now, stick with the analogy. If they're part of the wedding party, if they're waiting on the bridegroom, then you're talking about would-be believers, right? And that's a little disturbing. And so you've got that. This one, the parable of the talents, is not talking about waiting. It's talking about working. And it's, the connection is very simple. While we are waiting, and while we're looking, and while we're watching, then we are to be serving. We are to be at work. That's the point of this parable of the talents. And together, it puts together a balance of living in anticipation for the second coming. And it hasn't always been that way, right? When you go back and look, for instance, you remember in the church at Thessalonica, we were talking about this a little bit back in when we were looking at the 7 churches of Asia. Paul had to write his second letter to them. Why? Do you remember? What was what set that up? Yeah, they thought, okay, since he says in the first letter that his return is imminent, there was some that thought they missed it. Well, what about our relatives that have, what about them? And he has to address that. But kind of a knee-jerk reaction to it, then they said, well, if he's coming back, then there's no need in getting married, there's no need in going to work. And so they were basically just cashing everything out and standing around. And Paul has to write and tell them, look, some of you are so preoccupied with the second coming, you're not doing anything. You're not earning a living. You're running around, but you're not doing anything. And so his point in 2 Thessalonians is you better get back to work. And on the other hand, you look at people when Peter wrote in 1 Peter, he said there were people saying, where is the promise of his coming? And so you got both extremes. So there's got to be a balance here. Not all watching and all waiting and no working, and not all working and no watching and waiting. You got to have a balance of the both of the two of them. And just as a footnote, by the way, when we get to this very familiar parable here, there's a temptation sometimes to compare this one with Luke 19. Luke 19 is the parable of the pounds, but this is not the same. This is 2 different stories. The one in Luke 19, verses 11 through 27, that one had been given by Jesus several days before this one. And it's as different as it is similar. So don't confuse them and don't think it's the same story. They're actually 2 different ones. What we need to know then is Jesus is talking here about spiritual opportunity. And there are 4 things that we'll look at with this. One, we need to know the responsibility that we receive, the reaction that we need to have, the reckoning we face, and the reward that we gain. And I can already tell you, I'm not going to get to all 4 of them tonight, but there's a chance. So let's start with the responsibility that we receive. Let's back up now and look at verse 14. For it will be as when a man going on a journey called to his servants and entrusted to them his property. Now, automatically you note that there is a textual variance here. Your translation may start out with the phrase, for the kingdom of heaven is like. Well, that was added later. In fact, your translation should maybe have that in italics, or there should be a footnote noting that even the majority text doesn't have that was something that was added a little bit later, and that's okay since the 2 parables are linked together. It's obvious that he's still talking about the same thing. For it's like, or we say, well, what is the it? Well, he's talking about the kingdom. He's talking about the kingdom, and so your translation may go as far as to say, for the kingdom of heaven is like. Mine just simply says, and newer ones will just simply say, it will be as when a man goes on a journey. And when he does this, it's nothing unusual. The kingdom is like a man who travels into a far country, goes on a long trip. And he didn't just go out and catch a plane or even take a quick business trip and be back in a couple of weeks. Then, in those days, you might be gone a year. You could be gone 2 years. You just could be gone an undisclosed length of time. So this was a very common kind of thing. He goes away and he calls his own servants and delivers them his goods. This is what sets it up. Look at verse 15. Well, let's say, And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went out at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now we'll stop right there because there's a lot to kind of unpack here. Here's the picture. This man has a lot of servants, and interestingly enough, that word servant it is not the same as the word slave. These were not, bought and sold individuals. These could have been craftsmen or artisans or, someone with a certain amount of skill in that regard. What's one of the unfortunate parts of this is, and that is we modernize this, and people read this parable, and here's the man who received 5 talents and 2 talents, and 1 received 1. What's the comparison with? And I've got books in my office where the writer says, well, he'll talk about this. Well, he is a 5-talent man, and but he's not any more important than the 2-talent man. What is Jesus not talking about? He's not talking about ability. We're not talking about talented individuals, because the word talent here means what? Money. It means money. In fact, talents, was a weight. And so that currency, probably of silver, it could have been gold, but if it was currency, it was probably silver in that regard. So he calls his own servants, and as I said, this helps us to understand that these people were under his direction, they were under his authority, and so in the analogy, we're not talking about unbelievers. If the landowner, of course, is God, right? Then the servants would be whom? Well, that would be us. That's us. And so he calls them in, and he divides up his goods, and he apportions them. And here again, go back to verse 15. And this will tell you the responsibility. Unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1. How did he decide that? The next phrase. To every man according to his ability. So there were some that were entrusted with more than others. And here again, we could look at this from a modern day setting and come up with all kinds of possibilities. But the bottom line is, the landowner looked at one of these servants and he said, this guy has got the capabilities of taking this amount of property or this amount of money and flipping it. And he does. Because when you look at this, he gives 1 5 to the second 2 and the third 1. This is only an illustration. The numbers could be different, but they illustrate high, medium, and low, or not medium, but somewhere in the middle. And here again, we'll get beyond this English concept of talent. It was a weight. It was a weight of money. That's why in Revelation 16, it talks about a hailstone weighing a talent. There's a certain weight. We're not even really sure what it was. But verse 18 would seem to indicate that this was a coinage. And the problem with money back then was every time the emperor changed, the office of the emperor changed hands, well, then they had to reissue Roman currency. Why? Because the emperor was so insecure, every coin had to have his profile on it. And so they would reissue currency after the inauguration of an emperor. And most of it was silver in that regard. And here again, the value of that weight would depend on whether it was gold or silver or even copper. But I think verse 15 indicates that it's probably silver. So the man's going away. Now follow what he does. He gives them what amounts to be in weight a certain amount of coinage. Could have been bags, right? Bagged them up for him. And he probably did his bookkeeping, but he gave it to them as it were, bags of coins. One man got a bag full weighing 5 talents. Another one got a bag weighing 2 talents, and one got a bag weighing 1 talent. And the idea was to take this, invest it, and get a return. And work it. Show yourself faithful in that idea. And so it's, again, we can't get caught up on the monetary value because we don't really know what that was. So here, verse 15, here's the key to the whole thing. He gave them to every man according to his ability and took his journey. He'd already determined who would be able to take 5 talents and flip it. And it wasn't a knock just because that guy only got 1 talent. That wasn't a negative. The owner was trying to keep everybody within the realm of their capabilities, as it were. And so he goes and takes his journey, and Jesus says, 1 got 5, 1 got 2, and 1 got 1. And the first 2, of course, were able to double theirs. And then the 1 talent did what? He took it and he buried it, which was not all that unusual in that culture. You remember Jesus told a story in Matthew 13 about a man who was working in a field, and in the process of working the field, he uncovered what? Buried money. So he went and sold all that he had and bought the property. And then of course the treasure there buried on the land was his as well. I don't know that works that way in the modern era, but we hear all kinds of stories, particularly even here in Guntersville, about old houses and somebody was telling me one the other day that on their family's property there's still probably money buried on that property, but there's no way to determine where it is in that regard. So it's a rather unique habit. Yes, sir. Do what? No, he didn't tell me that either. I think that's probably a good reason. But it's very common back then. But you'll notice the 5 doubled his. The guy with 2 doubled his, and you would expect that even the 1 talent guy would have done what? He should have doubled that. That was the expectation. And we look at the first 2, you say, well, the 5 got 5 more, the 2 talent got 2 more, and we think, well, that's an equal percent. And it is. It's an equal percent in faithfulness, but it's not an equal result. The 5 talent guy still, was in that sense had produced more, and so I think Jesus is saying a lot of things here. Not the least of which is that God gives us differing capacities, and you think about what responsibilities there are on churches here in America, especially in the southeastern part of the United States. Don't you think that there's probably more expectations of churches in our part of the world than in other parts, not only other parts of our country, but certainly in Mexico and Cuba. And, wouldn't you think that there's, God expects more because of opportunity, because of resources. And I don't know if you saw the latest Christian Chronicle. There's a cover story about the Herald of Truth had back last summer, conducted an effort on the island of Cuba, and the church there in Matanzas the year before, in 2024, baptized 236 people in 1 year in a communist country. And so, like I said, there's a lot of things here that we could assume, and I think rightfully so. And so here, you've got these same three. You've got the same opportunity, the same privileges, the same, and 5 flips to 5 more, 2 flips to 2 more. But then you've got that one, and that's where we move from our responsibility to the reaction. What kind of reaction do we need to have with this? And what's our response? And what do we do with the spiritual opportunities that we have? And again, at verse 16, he that had received the 5 immediately went and traded with the same and made 5 more, likewise with the 2. And by the way, it says at the end of verse 16, he made. Look at that. The word there means he profited. He profited. So we're not talking about abilities. We're talking about profit. He took those 5 talents. He doubled his master's money. And that's the maximum. He couldn't have done any more than that. That's, he said, well, he could have tripled it. Well, yeah, but that's, we're trying to leave it within the realm of reason. And that's the point I think that Jesus is making. And verse 17, that likewise the one that had 2 gained 2 more. He made the most of that. But, verse 18, he that had received 1 went and dug in the earth and hid his Lord's silver money. And as I said, it's very common then to bury money in the ground. You remember back in the book of Numbers, in the book of Joshua, when they had conquered the city of Jericho, and then they went to the next city, the city of Ai, and they were defeated initially. 36 men were killed, and Joshua, asked the Lord what's happened, and the Lord said there's sin in the camp, and they found out that Achan and his entire family had stolen, and what did they do? They buried it. When he confessed to it, they buried it in the ground there in his tent, and so very common practice here. But what makes this so egregious is that with the same opportunities, the same, all that, this guy with 1 talent just chose, and I think that's the operative word, he chose to do nothing. You could say, all right, the owner comes back, and we'll look at this probably next week, his reaction to the first 2. And you say, well, okay, if the guy with the 5 had done that, if he had buried that, would the Lord be upset with him? Well, yeah, he would be just as mad because he wasted all that. And that makes the point here. The one who has the very least opportunity is also, which will be the guy with the 1 talent, is equally responsible, and I think that's crucial. That's crucial to this. And congregations have different levels of opportunity and resources and that kind of thing, but the expectation is the same. It's the same. And so we note that, we look at the responsibility that was given, the reaction to that, and then in verse 19, well, that leads to the reckoning. Because now the landowner comes home. And it's time to reconcile what happens. So, we're going to put a mark there. And we're going to pick back up here next week because I want you to read the rest of this. I want you to read 19. We'll go back and read the whole thing, but especially next week we'll hit 19 through 30. And there's a disturbing, there's a disturbing attitude that emerges because the landowner calls everybody in, and the guy that had the 5 talents said, I've gained 5 more. The guy with 2 said, I've gained 2 more. And the owner is elated and pronounces his reward to them. But the 1 talent one, there's a phrase there, and I want to probably camp out a little bit on this. Verse 24, he who had received the 1 came forward, saying, I knew you to be a hard man. Now see, what the guy should have done was just say, yeah, I know, you gave it to me, and I got scared of the market, or I got scared of, I didn't trust this this particular investment, so here it is. But no, he tries to do what? He tries to justify the fact that he does what? That he does nothing. Now, go ahead and give you a little heads up. We have, historically, we have come up with all kinds of excuses for not doing what God has placed us here to do consistently. We've come up with a whole long laundry list of excuses. But may I say, none of which are valid. Anyway, I'm going to save that. But the crux of this entire thing to me is verse 25. He starts kind of basically insinuating that the reason he didn't do anything wasn't his fault, it was whose fault? It was the owner's fault. Dumb mistake. That was just really dumb. I knew you were a hard man, reaping where you didn't sow and gathering where you did not winnow. And here it is. So I was afraid. Yeah. So let's kind of hold it right there and see how the owner reacts to that. It's not good, but we'll look at it next week.